Now let's create our dequeue method. Dequeue is going to look like this, and then we're going to return that node that we removed. But we have a couple of edge cases. One is if we only have one item in the queue, and the other is if we don't have any items in the queue. So we'll start with this scenario first, and we'll say dequeue. We'll say if the length is 0, we will return none. And we'll remove that. And let's do this for one node. So it doesn't matter if we have one or if we have two or more. That means we're going to return a node. So we need to have a variable point to it. So we'll say temp equals self.first. And for removing one item, we'll say if the length is 1, we set first and last equal to none, just like that. So let's look at this in with the rest of our code. So far we have written code for if we have 0 items in our queue, and if we have 1 item. So now we're going to do this for 2 or more items. So let's focus in on the else, and we'll bring this up. And remember, temp is already pointing to self.first. We already did that. So the first thing we're going to do is move that first pointer over 1. So we'll say first equals first dot next. We'll do that with this line of code here. First equals first dot next. And that is going to move that over. Then we'll say temp dot next is none. And we'll do that with this line of code here. Temp dot next equals none. And that removes that from our queue. So let's look at this with the rest of our code. And the only things left to do are to decrement the length by 1 and return temp. So we'll look at this code in a moment in VS Code. And we'll build this queue with a 2 and a 1. And that way we can test all 3 of our scenarios. First, we'll test to see if this works with 2 or more items, and we'll dequeue that. Then we'll see if it works with 1 item, and we'll dequeue that. And then we'll run it again with 0 items to make sure that works and returns none. All right, now let's flip over to VS Code. Okay, so there is our dequeue method there. And this is going to build our queue with 1 and 2. And then we'll run this line of code to print out the queue, and we should get 1 and 2. So I'll run this. Okay, so there is our 1 and our 2. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up here. And then I'm going to replace this print queue with this. And all we're doing here is running dequeue 3 times. Once for when we have 2 items in the queue, and then for 1 item, and then for 0 items. So I'll run this. And that gives us our 2 nodes, and then it finally returns none when we have the empty queue. And then to make sure that these nodes that are being returned are the values that we're expecting, I'm going to come up here. Then I'm going to change this to temp.value. And then I'll run this again. And that is returning the 1 node and the 2 node, and then finally returns none. Then I'll come up here and remove the dot value. And it looks like we have a working method for dequeue.